So many thanks to Yorgos Sanidas and Nikolas Papadimitriou for the kind invitation. I would like to share some thought with you about the usefulness of new technologies in expanding our understanding of techniques and workshops in ancient Greek sculpture. My presentation and my observation will be based on my own experience and practice in the field. To begin with, I would say that the use of new technologies is never an end in itself, despite the fascination they sometimes exert on us. They always come second when traditional tools of study and analysis fail to provide answers to the questions being asked. The key moment is when asked the right question faced with a new challenge. I think that the challenge is the right word for new technologies. The key moment, so choosing the right analytical tool is part of this challenge. This requires the researcher to be vigilant about new technologies. Ideally, as often happens, it would be best to anticipate the application of technologies developed in other scientific fields, such as medicine, physics, or chemistry, to archaeology. Based on my own experience, some 30 years ago, I encountered such difficulties when studying the sculptures workshop in Delos. More than 100 marble pieces were partially or completely unfinished. Among these were miniature copies of famous types of Aphrodite found all around the Stoa of Philippe V, King of Macedonia. On the side, you see the locations of the Stoa, here and here on the side. There are some, next slide, you will see some illustrations from the article I published then. As you see on the right part of the slide, Cnidian and Pudica types of Aphrodite are well represented in this corpus of unfinished work at different stages of the carving process, as testified by various visible tool marks on the surface of the statue. A careful study of the group of unfinished works led me to conclude that one or several workshops were specialized in the mass production of low-cost polycraft figurines. In some cases, the entire production process could be reconstructed, as suggested on this slide. It seems that direct carving was favored by using also a small set of tools. I thought the study of this set of unfinished works allows us to understand the work of the sculpture workshop, but it doesn't not document the final stage of completing the sculpture in Delos during the Hellenistic period. So I was saying that it does not document the final stage of completing a sculpture. And this observation caused a form of frustration for me, summarized in the contrast between these two works on the left and on the right. My first Delian, so you see on the left a poor small statuette at the very beginning of the carving process, as found in the Stoa of Philippe. And on the right, a small polychrome statue of Aphrodite, offering bright and precious colors. So my first Delian challenge was therefore to try to document this last stage of the fabrication of a sculpture, that is to say its painting or even its gilding. It led me to establish new collaborations and research programs, first in Delos, then in Delphi, to address these new challenges by using new analytical and digital technologies. Two of them had as the subject of study the polychromy of grid sculpture. The first one, so these are the new collaborations. The first one was the polychrome Hellenistic sculpture in Delos, research on surface treatments of ancient marble sculpture. And it was with my colleague Brigitte Bourgeois of the Centre de Recherche et de Restauration des Musées de France. We worked together about 10 years. And after we went other ways. And the second was in Delphi. The theme was a polychromy of the frieze of the Scythian treasury at Delphi, new investigations, new results, new archaeological and historical questions. This was with Matthias Alfred and Philippe Walter of the Laboratoire d'Archéologie Moléculaire et Structurale. I know that Athanasius Psalti is among us tonight or this evening. Θα ήθελα να την ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ για την βοήθεια που μας έδωσε για την δουλειά μας από τώρα, ας πούμε, 5 ή 6 χρόνια. Λοιπόν, να πάω τώρα στο θέμα. Πάλι, τότε το τρίτο, the third one, aims. The third one aims at publishing the sculpture decoration of the Solos of Delphi, study, then publication. And this program is with the help of Virginie Fromageau-Lagneps of the same laboratory than I, and with Alban Brice-Pimpot of Archeo 3D, who has done all the digital pictures you see on the screen. So, in these three cases, material analysis and digital techniques are required or were required. Let's start by first recalling their nature as well as their field and scope of action. I know you know all them, but I think it's a good idea to remember maybe some points. Analytical techniques, Analytical techniques refer to a broad range of methods and tools used to determine a chemical or physical property of chemical substance, chemical element, by means of specific instruments. Analytical techniques include, for instance, spectroscopy, chromatography, mass spectrometry, and X-ray diffraction. As you know, analytical techniques can be divided in two main categories: non-destructive and destructive techniques. Destructive techniques include RTF spectrometry, micro-Raman spectrometry, and gas chromatography, performed on a few microsamples in order to identify the organic constituent materials, that is to say, colorants and binders. But as you know, also sampling is necessary, and then destructive and must remain at the second line option when non-destructive techniques have no result. So remember the second line option. They offer not only the same benefits as non-invasive or destructive techniques, but allow also the characterization of the origin of material, marble, other stones, gives information about datation, workshops, and trading. Non-destructive techniques include among three main types are of great interest for the archaeologists or the curator involved into the study of ancient sculpture: XRF spectroscopy, scanning XRF, hyperspectral imaging. The benefits of these non-destructive techniques for studying ancient sculptures techniques and workshop are as follows: no sampling, and as you know, it became difficult this last year to take samples on statues for good reasons, I think, as in many cases, many of them remain unpublished. Near the Earth, that is a second advantage of these non-destructive techniques. Without contact, instruments are more and more light and portable, as shown on the next slide. Here are the instruments which were during the investigation of the frieze of the Scythian treasury used. Left, you see a hyperspectral push broom scanner, and right, an XRF scanner. As regard now digital techniques, they include, among others, digital database, digital scanning, digital modeling, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. I will come back to them later after discussing the analytical techniques. Let's begin with the first application of these analytical techniques connected to one of our first challenges, answering the following questions in relation to the techniques of painting and to the know-how of the painter of the sculpture of marble sculpture in Delos, by starting from a set of statues where some very small remnants of colors were visible at certain locations, as visible on this slide. The questions were the statue painted all over its surface? What were the pigments used? How were they applied to the surface of the marble? Is there any connection between pigments found during the excavations and those used by painters? For answering these questions, the archaeologist can use three main techniques. First, a digital video microscopic surveying of the surface. Second, a general surveying by color photography under UV fluorescence or infrared photography. Third, a global surveying by XRF spectroscopy. UV fluorescence was used in Delos as a first option for revealing arrays of colors on some polychrome Hellenistic sculptures masterpieces. On the pink mantle of this Aphrodite, for instance, on the parapet, this kind of vertical stripe painted in mauve on this small Aphrodite, once again, the bright fluorescence suggests both an organic pigment for the color and for the binder. It was used also for evidence, the lace painted on the white leather boot of this representation of Artemis killing a deer, a group found in a house of the quarter of the theater. Last, for revealing the large colored stripes painted on and at the edge of the mantle worn by this statue of Tyche. After this first phase, material analysis techniques, XRF spectrometry, XRF macroscanning, and hyperspectral imaging are required first. For identifying the nature of pigments, inorganic pigments or organic colorant, for identifying the composition of gold, then for evidencing their role in creating colors, by using one pigment only or mixed or two or more pigments. Last, for documenting the techniques of application by means or not of a preparation layer. Identifying the palette. Using XRF spectrometry gives good results for this general purpose. As shown on the next slide, in the case of Delos, where analyses were done by Andreas Caridas about 20 years ago now. In this modern color box were put together all the raw pigments collected all along the excavations in Delos. They were analyzed and identified by Andreas Caridas, as shown on the slide. In Delos, in fact, 3 ways of producing colors were identified. First, by using pure colors based on one pigment only, here lead white. Then, by mixing together 2 or more pigments in order to obtain different tonalities of the same color or for creating a new color. Here's the detail of this slide. Here the Egyptian blue was mixed with light white for obtaining this light blue. By using also white pigment, white pink, organic pink colorant mixed with lead white too, once again, or by mixing together 2 pigments. Here the color is a mix of 2 of Egyptian blue and once again an organic pink colorant. You see here the detail of the precedent. The last way for producing colors was by putting on a layer upon another one, each one on a different color. Here is an Egyptian blue mixed with lead white layer, and it was put upon a pink one, suggesting a final color resulting on the superposition of these 2 color layers, or a reparation or a reinterpretation, maybe by a second-hand buyer. To sum up, such methods help us better understand the know-how of the painter on marble, the different way where they mix the pigments at different times. The way Greek gilded their marble sculpture in Delos is also better known now, as shown by the following illustrations. Here, the gold foil seems to be applied on a yellow ochre layer, put on a lead white on a ochre layer. This clear stratigraphy was confirmed by XRF analysis of Andreas Caridas, once again. And usually, in Delos, very pure gold was used for gilding marble statues. You know here the results. Alors, notice that these results were obtained in Delos spot by spot, as neither XRF scanning nor hyperspectral imaging were at our disposal. More recently, new technological developments combine the same process, surveying and analyzing surface treatments, and give us great new opportunities in this field of research. But sometimes XRF spectrometry or hyperspectral imaging are necessary to check the presence or the absence of color by identifying elements. It gave recently some spectacular results from my point of view. When, for instance, artificial surface treatments are supposed under concretions, but their existence impossible to prove. It occurred in Delphi when studying the polychromy of the Siphnian treasury, dedicated at the end of the last quarter of BC to Apollo, and originally ornamented with rich colors, both on architectural parts and on the art relief carved figures. You see on this slide, but you know very much, you know very good, the location of the treasury, dedicated during the last quarter of the 6th century BC. It was, as you know, also decorated with a continuous polychrome frieze, 28 meters long, 65 centimeters high, whose 115 figures were carved in high relief and painted in bright colors. On the east side of the Ionic frieze, a famous fight of the Trojan War between Achilles and Memnon was carved and painted. No remnant of color was visible by the naked eye on the Gorgoneion carved on the Achilles shield. My colleague Matthias Alfred, chemist specialized in X-ray spectroscopy and hyperspectral imaging, faced the challenge of revealing the invisible, that is to say, evidencing colors beneath concretions. Concretions, you see the concretion upon the Gorgoneion of Achilles. And he succeeded by using macroscopic X-ray fluorescence, and he could this way evidence major elements like calcium, iron, copper, and lead. Notice that for obtaining such a result, the simple X-ray fluorescence would not be adapted. This was a new challenge for us. If macroscopic X-ray fluorescence is similar to traditional X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, it uses a larger X-ray beam to map, as you see on the slide, the elemental composition of a larger area of an object surface. This allows for the investigations of the distribution of pigments and other materials used in the creation of the object. It testified then that the Gorgoneion was originally painted with red and mauve pigments. Matthias Alfred could also give us the composition of the pigments, iron oxide, and a mix of red, ochre, and azurite for the mauve. You see here on the slide too. It was some kind of spectacular issue, and it reminds us that we do not, it's impossible for us to clean the surface of a statue, even if concretions are present, and we need to remain very, very precautious in this challenge. Another of these challenges consisted also in documenting or not the presence of a preparation layer invisible by naked eye. We could also do it by using the same analytical technique. On the east frieze, for instance, a degraded azurite background was evidenced on the red underlayer. The use, you see here, I cannot detail you the result, as Matthias Alfred could do that, but I'm not capable to do it. The use of hyperspectral imaging gives us new possibilities and results for identifying at the same time the nature and the extension of colored area, as shown on the left part of the same button. Here, the false color image show the distribution of red hematite on the inner shield of the three warriors. You see the dead warrior and two others. And as you see also, this method helps mapping larger array very, very quickly in a very fast way for a better understanding of the polychromatic syntax of the frieze. That is to say, the meaning of such distribution of colors in its different parts, taking into account the nature of pigments. Observe, for instance, the contrast between background here in green, false color. It was originally painted in blue, and figure. It was the first time I saw such a result. I think it was one of the first time it could also, we could attest such use of hyperspectral imaging for high relief ancient sculpture. This kind of, maybe I do a mistake, this kind of results is very important as regards our main thematic about sculpture and painter workshops by giving us information on the progress and kind of work on a large array crossed with the identification of pigments used for coloring. So at the same time, you can have information about the pigment and about the extension of this coloring. I think it's most important for us. And as you saw at the beginning of my talk, you understood that it was a light instrument, even if it needs, of course, a very good scientist. So, for instance, on the Siphnian frieze, hyperspectral imaging confirms the existence of two different varieties of blue for the background of the frieze. Two different blues have been observed by naked eye. An intensive one on the east and north frieze, a lighter one on the south and west frieze. Macro X-ray fluorescence and hyperspectral imaging confirm this optic observation. Degraded azurite was evidence on the eastern frieze of, here, to the left of Athena, maybe it's a better on this slide, voilà. To the left of Athena climbing on or getting out of a chariot. Egyptian blue was identified on the west frieze and on the south frieze, confirming the partition between east and north frieze on the one and west and south side on the other. Specialists as Pierre de la Côte-Messayer has a long time ago observed two men hands in carving techniques between south and west frieze from one part and east and north frieze from the other part. The use of these two different pigments for coloring the background reinforced then the hypothesis that two workshops were commissioned at the same time to paint and carve this side. I think it's a good example of the distribution of work between workshops, maybe at the same time, but they were commissioned maybe from two different ways. And this is a good testimony of the way workshop and artisans were working in ancient Greece at the archaic time and later. I think it's okay. Alors, last, the use of the same instrument, that is to say hyperspectral imaging, and the use of same methods give us information on details painted rather than carved at the marble surface. And here maybe you see or not the painted rings here and part of the horse which was painted rather than carved in some part of it, maybe for economic or technical reasons, maybe for aesthetic and artistic purposes. But to decide or not, we need to have testimony, evidence, archaeological evidence. Then these methods of perspective imaging helps us to decide. First, but this is some method we some now 20 years ago with Brigitte Bourgeois, that succeed in evidencing without hyperspectral imaging such workshops practice and without the help of new technology, except for UV fluorescence. As I told at the beginning, new technologies occur at second and not at first intention. Painting and colors, besides their coloring values, are used in archaic Delphic relief, as in Delian Hellenistic sculpture, as a substitute for carving detail, as an optional way of shaping figure. So first, as a substitute for detailed carving, you see on the slide the right and left feet of a male figure from Delos. The lace of the sandal are gradually painted instead of being sculpted. Another attestation of the same practice is visible on the right boot of Artemis. Instead of carving details of lace on the boot, as shown of the Delian boot here on the right, another Delian boot, a painting was in this case preferred. The next three slides show desire for precision in details. And the eyelet painted is red, was painted red on a yellow brownish layer itself upon the white substratum. We observe, I think I made a mistake here. Well, we observe, as I told a little bit before, the same practice, identical practice on the west frieze of the Scythian treasury. So we recognize on this side, well, recognize on this side one of the three goddesses. So I told you just before, we don't recognize nothing, Torah, now. And this is an important here part as picture, as it we show now that such hyperspectral imaging help us to propose a partial reconstruction of the red and green pattern of the Athena-Imation border. You see here the clear in-false color, different color of this paint part of the Imation. As a transition towards our second category of new technology, the digital techniques, I would just trace on another use of painting and marble for shaping and modeling, we evidence with Brigitte Bourgeois now some years ago, as I told you. As shown, for instance, under the lip of this head of a stylen, possibly for deepening the corner of the lip. It was also evidence on the imation of the statuette of Aphrodite, I present on beginning. Here, a touch of lead white for lighting the edge of the imation folds was found in some places and mapped, as you see on the left side, as you see with result in this 3D model. Each spot of color is identified here by a unique number. Another spot were localized on the top of the left Nile. Such a use of white was with a touch of Egyptian blue for shading, was also documented. In this case, light and shadow shaping was associated with subtle color tones variation on the dress itself. Last but not least, we observed with Brigitte such a light and shadow shaping on the statue of Artemis, a blue line painted in order to darken the bottom of the fold, and all these observations suggest that in Delos as in Delphi, painters applied with brio to a 3D object the art of panel painting, inviting us to use another set of digital techniques. That is my last point. As you know, digital techniques include creation of 3D replica of ancient Greek sculpture, or constructions of their original form, return also to the initial phase of creation of the model. I think it's the most important. I want to show you the proplasma and the restitution of the final exhibition location and context of reception of a statue. Let's begin with the first mission of reconstructing replica, creation of replica. Donc, these digital techniques include, of course, 3D scanning, 3D modeling, 3D digital reconstruction, and for tools and methods, 3D scanner photogrammetry. Alors, such digital techniques allow us better understanding of sculptors' work by seeing tool marks, their nature, their extension, their kind of use. I'm going to give you an example taken from my research on the sculpture decoration of the Tolos of Delphi. The rotonde, as you know, was decorated with 2 Doric friezes. Each of them included 40 metopes, illustrating various famous iconographic themes as an Amazonmachi and Centauromachy. Most of them was deleted at the end of the antiquity and their fragments scattered across the excavation site. One of the purposes of our program is to publish them in the form of an online digital publication, forthcoming. In the research program on the sculpture decoration of the Tolos of Delphi, with a view to its publication in a few years, a whole campaign of modeling of more than 500 fragments is in progress. Among them was done the 3D replica of this metop belonging to Doric external frieze of the Tolos, a circular rotonde whose destination remains uncertain. So I will stop the partage and see you just a few minutes. The result of this. Maybe you see the Mesh Lab picture. So you see a reproduction, a replica, a 3D replica of this metop. And of course, such a work helps us to understand the way the metop was carved, and maybe you see here the details of the work of the, I think you see it better. One of the most important use of this 3D replica is that you can work on it every day, every night, whenever you want. And so it's important. And it's very important also for the archives of the Museum of Delphi and the archive of the French School of Athens. So Okay. Second challenge is a digital reconstruction of the original sculpture, including lost parts of its body parts, added element like weapons, attributes, but also colors, gilding, and last part, but not least, original shining. Such reconstruction is useful for better understanding not only the original theme, but also the complementary works between painter and sculpture, for instance. We propose such reconstructions in our present research. In this case, in Delphi, it was traditionally based on iconographic parallels, and you see here that the best parallel is provided by this group of a Greek and an Amazon belonging to the Ionic internal frieze of the temple of Apollon Epicurus at Bassae. In a first time, both tool and destruction marks were located and studied with the aim of finding the correct original position of the figures. You see it on the slide. Then the general composition and figure were compared in a va-et-vient between the métope and the Bassae or other parallels. Donc you see the result of this va-et-vient. And I don't know if I have enough time to see the result of this final reconstruction, but let's go now to this the kind of work we did with Alban Brice-Pimpeau. Here we see that with such a va-et-vient between the parallel and the way we could put on the métope the two figures together is a kind of return to the very first moment of the creation of the proplasma. And it was very important, I think, this kind of model, of modeling, of digital modeling, helps us for better understanding of the first creation time. I think it's a very, this perspective of digital tools, it's very, very interesting for us. And also we see different steps, different essay we did for better understanding the way these figures were put on the plaque itself. Now ending, we are here, you see. Ending, I would like to present you shortly an illustration of the restitutions of the final exhibition location and context of reception of the statue in order to estimate the value of such process for better understanding techniques and workshop. The Delian group of Artemis and the deer gave us a unique opportunity to have an idea, even if partial, of the taste of the inhabitants of Delos. As you remember, maybe it was found in situ and was probably located on a podium. You see here on the left side of this slide, on the opposite side of the main entrance here of the house at the end of this long hall corridor. Color and patterns of constructions of the group were based. I see you see the photography which were taken at the very time of the excavation with the podium and the situation of the podium at the end of the corridor. Color, and pattern reconstructions of the group were based on 2D ancient parallels and on the observation under digital video microscopy crossed with XRF analysis. For instance, two polychrome borders the one at the edge of the apoptema, the other at the lower part of the breast, were revealed and compared to vase iconography. They help us to understand such a rich, subtle, and complex superposition of stripes of different colors. Go back just a little while. To understand such a rich, subtle, and complex superposition of stripes of different color, creating a pattern of alternate narrow and large stripes, 11 in total, with a color gradation striking effect. Here, the 3D imagery can help to imagine such a position and its meanings by putting into its primitive context the group itself. This great job was done by Fabricia Fouquet, a French architect who took into consideration various parameters such as the location, of course, of the group at the end of a corridor, but also its level, the role played by sunlight in connection to the moment of the day, as it seems that the corridor was in the open air. In the three last slide, you see this reception of such a 3D image depending on these last parameters. And the one is at the beginning of the day, the second one in the middle of the day, and the last one is about at the end of the day, like now. These attempts for reconstructing the original exhibition place of the statue help us, I think, to understand the constraints and their effect on the statue's manufacturing process. The sculpture had to consider the lighting when carving and painting, probably at the location itself during his last operation. So I think that this last operation of painting and even of gilding, when gilding was commissioned, was operated in situ, on site, to be sure that the right eclat shinings, the right appearance, the best scene point of view will be obtained in order to provoke it a sort of I would say tambos in some way. So I think that the nature of pigment, the brightness, the depth of the relief were then a matter of choice and of experience, and this was one of the most important part of this know-how of the Greek ancient sculpture. So thank you very much. I think that this is a non-exhaustive presentation, as you understood. I think we have now new challenges, of course. Artificial intelligence is for the most important challenge for us, for big data elaboration and treatment, for working practice, for understanding jest also, and to be sure to understand with more and more data the way ancient sculpture were carved and painted. So thank you very much.